So 2 years ago, my family and I were driving from Townsville to Broomshead, New South Wales, which is about 4 hours south to Brisbane. This was at Christmas time. And we decided that with kids, if you've experienced this, it's easier to drive when they're asleep than when they are awake. And so that's how we plan our trips all the time. And we drove after one of the nights at the stable NQ. So I think we left at about 10 p.m. And our plan was just to drive throughout the night so that we can get there with them sleeping most of the way. It was a brilliant plan until I got to Brisbane, because in Brisbane, we were planning on spending time with Fiona's granddad. He was living out there, and we just wanted to visit him, A, to see him, but B, just to get a bit of a break, because we've been driving for like 18 hours at that point. And so we put in our navigation, in our Apple Maps, the destination that we had to go. And after driving, so we got in the Brisbane area. We were driving for about an hour, and my wife Fiona said, "John, I don't think we're going the right way. We should be there by now." And I said, "Fiona, it's in the map. We're going the right way, right? The map does not lie." And so we just kept driving, and I'm exhausted by this point. I just want to lay down on a couch or lay down in a bed in a fetal position and fall asleep, because we've just been driving for so long, and I did most of the driving. And then I just came to my senses, and I said, you know what? I think you're right. Let's just double check the map. So on your maps, if you don't end your previous route before starting a new route, it will just take you to your previous route and then add your new route like on top of that. So I was still driving as if I was going to New South Wales, and I was just like, oh my goodness, I've just wasted so much time. Like, I got to turn this thing around, because we are not heading to our ideal or our intended destination. In the end, we did get there after wasting a whole bunch of time, but that's what we're talking about in this series. Because there are times in our life, there are seasons in our life, there are situations where you can just admit that you need a turnaround. Whether it's in your marriage or your parenting, or maybe it's at your school, like you're making poor decisions, or it's your mental or emotional health, or you just know you're on a downward spiral in that season. Maybe it's your finances, and you can just recognize that, hey, I need a turnaround, because the way I'm going isn't going to end well. And so in this series, we're looking at a time-tested truth from the book of Jonah. We're going through the book of Jonah because it really does have time-tested wisdom that will help us turn around just about anything. It'll help us turn around just about anything. And the book of Jonah, if you've never read it before, it's written in more of a parable, fable style of writing. So it's been the story of Jonah. If you don't know the story of Jonah, he gets thrown overboard, he gets eaten by the fish, and then he goes to where he needs to go, like God sends a fish to swallow him up. The story had been told over and over and over again before it had been documented, and then once it's been documented, they take sort of the richest, best parts of the story, and it was written in a parable, fable style. And the genre of writing is satire. If you don't know what satire means, if you've ever watched Saturday Night Live, that's sort of like the satire style of comedy. Because when you read the story of Jonah, everybody is doing the complete opposite of what they ought to be doing. Right? Jonah, a prophet, is meant to be going to Nineveh. That's where the Lord sends him, but he decides to go to Tarshish in Spain, the coast of Spain. And he goes on the ship, and there's this huge storm. And while everybody else is looking up to their gods, Jonah, the prophet of the God of Israel, Yahweh, goes beneath deck. He goes under deck and falls asleep. And there's this comical flavor that goes through the book of Jonah. And everybody is just sort of doing the opposite of what they're doing, of what they're meant to be doing. And the intent, when you're reading the book of Jonah, is for the audience to correct their behavior and to not be like Jonah, to make decisions that Jonah doesn't make. And so there's 4 chapters in the book of Jonah, and it's sort of like a 2-act play. The book of Jonah is broken up into 2 acts, and each act has 2 scenes. Okay, so you got Act 1, Scene 1, Scene 2. Act 2, Scene 1, Scene 2. And so Act 1, Scene 1 is Chapter 1. Act 2, Scene 1 is Chapter 3. Act 1, Scene 2 is chapter 2, and Act 2, Scene 2 is chapter 4. Are you with me? Are you following? Okay? All you got to know is there's 2 acts and 2 scenes, and the reason I say that is because each scene 1 in Act 1 and Scene 1 in Act 2, is very parallel. There's a lot of parallels that's happening. In Act 1, Scene 1, and Act 2, Scene 1, there is this moment where the Word of God comes to Jonah. And then Jonah decides to almost ignore it, and there is an external turmoil. There's an external conflict that happens. So that's in Act 1, Scene 1, and Act 2, Scene 1. And then in Act 1, Scene 2, and Act 2, Scene 2, Jonah cries out to God, and there is an internal turmoil. So when you're reading the book of Jonah, there's all these parallels that go between the 2 acts. And so last week, we talked about Act 1, Scene 1, and today we're going to talk about Act 1, Scene 2. And so last week in Act 1, Scene 1, Jonah sets out in the wrong direction. If you remember, I showed you a map. If you haven't watched part 1, you can go on our YouTube channel or listen on our podcast or our website. But Jonah the Lord says, go to Nineveh, which on the map is over here, like in the northern mountains of Iraq. But Jonah decides to go in the complete opposite direction to a place called Tarshish, which is like the coast of Spain. Okay, and so this starts a complete downward spiral of behavior and circumstances for Jonah. There's this downward spiral that happens where everything's looking down. And why do I say everything's looking down? When things aren't going well for you or when things aren't going well for me, we often say we're just down in the dumps, right? Things aren't looking up. Things are looking down. And so Jonah, based off his decisions to go against what he knows, what he ought to do, he creates chaos for the people around him. And the people around him have no idea what's going on or why they're in the midst of the storm. And while they're wondering what's going on and they're fearful for their lives, Jonah is below deck having a sleep. And then Jonah has to wake up. A captain, the ship captain, comes below deck and says, Jonah, wake up. How can you be sleeping? Do you see what's going on? And last week, we said that that's the first step to navigating a turnaround in a season of your life. That you need to wake up to what's actually going on. You need to open your eyes to the reality of the situation that you're in. We need to stop hiding from it. We need to stop just trying to survive the chaos that we've created, right? We need to stop denying that we've created this chaos or denying that we are in the situation that we are actually in. Because when we are down in the dumps, or when our actions and our behavior has caused hurt for ourselves or other people, we don't want to take the blame and accept it, do we? That's not our natural human instinct to say, yep, that's on me, sorry guys. Right? That's why we try to hide it and bury it and survive it. We don't want to fess up to what's really going on. And so the first thing that we need to do to navigate a turnaround when things are looking down in a season of your life or a certain area of your life, whether it's your marriage or your parenting or whatever it is, you need to open your eyes to the reality of what's going on and what your behavior has done. And so today we're talking about Act 1, Scene 2. And this scene, not only, it doesn't just include the fish swallowing up Jonah. And the fish is not the main story of this character, okay? That's what we sort of remember when we think the book of Jonah. Oh yeah, the fish swallows Jonah. But it doesn't just contain the fish swallowing Jonah. It also contains the next step for a turnaround. But before I get to Act 1, Scene 2, last week I didn't read the last verse of Act 1, Scene 1. So Jonah has just been thrown overboard, if you remember. And then, just before I say this, Jonah, the crew on the ship were trying to figure out what's going on with this storm. Like, how do we stop it? They had all called on their gods, and it hadn't stopped, and Jonah was the only one that hadn't tried to call on their god. And they decipher and they discern that Jonah was the reason why the storm was there. And their discernment was that we got to throw Jonah overboard. Now, they didn't want to, but that's just what they felt like they had to do. And so they throw Jonah overboard, and the storm stops. Okay? And the storm was there because Jonah had gone the opposite way of what he was meant to do. The Lord said, hey, go to Nineveh, and he got on a boat and went in the opposite direction, which we do that too, so let's not judge Jonah. You read Scripture, you know what God says about how we should live our lives, and how often do we say, no, thank you, that's too hard, or I think I know what's best, and we go in the opposite direction of what we know we ought to do. So let's take it easy on Jonah, because we can all relate to Jonah. This is what happens. After he'd been thrown overboard, now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. And as we've discovered last week, in like 1930s, and Steve and Sal went in 2001. It didn't happen in 2001. This actually happened. A whale swallowed a man in the 1940s, I think it was, and he survived. So I just think that's remarkable. The Lord provided a huge fish for Jonah, and he was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Okay? So imagine this. When the curtain goes down in scene 1, okay? So this is the end of scene 1. And then we all go to intermission. You're at a play. We all go to intermission. Can you go back, please? Thank you. And then it all goes dark, and then the curtains go up for scene 2. But this being in the belly of the fish is like a literary metaphor for being stuck. You're stuck. You're stuck in the belly of the beast. And it happens time and time again in movies and books that you read. You get stuck in the belly of the beast. And Jonah and the sailors were on the boat when the storm came up. And they throw Jonah overboard, and he's sinking. So we'll go to the next slide. So if you can imagine this right now, okay? This is my beautiful drawing. We've got the waves, the storm, the little boat, and there's Jonah. He's been thrown overboard, and he goes down, he's sinking, and eventually this beautiful fish, sort of veggie tail style fish, swallows Jonah. And like I said, the motif of being in the belly of the fish is one of the most famous and often repeated motifs ever told. It's been used to try to, and the ironic thing is that this situation has been used to try to discredit the Bible, right? Skeptics and critics will say that there's no way that this could actually happen scientifically. And so therefore, if that's not true, the Bible's not true. But isn't it ironic that this situation we just see time and time again, right? You see it in like The Lion King. You see it in Star Wars. You see it in Gladiator. You see it in Harry Potter. If it didn't resonate or wasn't relatable or true to the human experience, it would never survived. And it would never be repeated time and time again in different stories. So Jonah, he's trapped in the stomach of the beast, which represents being stuck in a season. It represents being stuck in a certain circumstance. It represents you're stuck in a hardship, or you're stuck in brokenness. Or maybe you're going through pain and you just can't figure out, how do I ease the pain? How do I get out of this situation? It's so difficult. This is so hard. I don't know how I got in this circumstances, but I just feel stuck. Can you relate to that? Do you ever feel stuck? Do you ever just get in this moment where you don't know how you got there? You get in this circumstance where, because we don't intentionally put ourselves in circumstances where we want to be stuck. And so Jonah's wondering, how did I get here? And how am I going to get out? I don't want to be stuck. I don't want to stay here forever. And I didn't get here on purpose. How did I get here? I'm in the belly of a whale. I'm stuck. How am I going to get out of this mess that I've created for myself? How am I going to get out of this mess that I've created for others? And so whether you're a Jesus follower or not, in the midst of chaos or in the midst of these seasons, we wonder, is this like a punishment? Am I being punished? Is this a punishment of some kind? What is the purpose, or why am I experiencing this? Is this a result of something I've done? Or is this a result of something that somebody else has done? How long will this season last? How long will I be stuck like this? How the heck do I get out of it? And so this is the beginning of Act 1, Scene 2, which is chapter 2 of Jonah. So it's been dark, the curtains come up, and now we find we're in a different setting, and Jonah is in the belly of the fish. So Act 1, Scene 1 ends with Jonah being thrown overboard and eaten by the fish, and now he is in the belly of the fish, and this is what we see. From inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. And so what follows now is this brilliantly poetic, put-together prayer from the belly of the beast. And the prayer is arranged in a repeating theme of 4 couplets, okay? So while things are still looking down for Jonah, when he looks up to God, things are looking up. So there's this downward moment for Jonah and this upward moment towards God. And it's just an amazing, illiterate masterpiece that we get to sort of decipher and work through. So each couplet provides a unique insight regarding Jonah's experience, and it's meant to be sort of a set of glasses through which we view our own struggle. So he says, "In my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From deep in the realm of the dead, I called for help, and you listened to my cry." So Jonah is deep amid his circumstances. He is in deep trouble, and he has created these circumstances which most people, from deep in the realm of death, most people wouldn't survive this. Most people wouldn't come back from this. So Jonah cries out to God. He's at the bottom of the barrel. Doesn't this sound familiar? When we get to the bottom of the barrel, we cry out to God to save us. He defies God's direction, right? He defied what God asked him to do. He went in the opposite direction of what he knew he ought to do, and he goes his own way, and he creates his own mess because he didn't want to do what God had for him. Isn't it true, okay? I just think this is so funny because it's so relatable thousands and thousands of years later that we still do the same thing today. We know what God wants us to do. We've got the Bible. We've got the scriptures. We know what we ought to do. But we go the opposite direction. We go our own way. And then stuff hits the fan and we blame God for our circumstances. Right? If we would have went the way that we know God has for us, the plans and purposes for our life, what is good, what is noble, then we probably wouldn't be in that circumstances. But because we didn't go to Nineveh, we went to Tarshish, whatever you want to say, and we've made a mess of things, and we're going to blame God for those circumstances. And so Jonah discovers something that I think is so true. And I really hope that if you're in a season and if you're at the bottom right now, or you're in one of these circumstances, or you know someone that's in this circumstance, Jonah created this mess for himself. He turned his back on, he went in the opposite direction of what he knew he ought to do. He's in the belly of the whale. And he learns that you are never too far for God to hear your cry. You are never too far from God that he won't hear your voice when you cry out. You cannot turn your back far enough from God. You can't go deep into the depths of the ocean far enough where God will not hear your cry, where he will not say, "Welcome home. Come to me. My grace and my love is sufficient for all." Regardless of where you've been or what you've done, you are never too far from God. Whatever you did last night, whatever you did last week, you are not too far from God. Whatever mess you've put yourself in or people around you in, you are not too far from God. However much you've turned your back on him, you just need to hear me. You just need to cry out to him, and he will listen, and he will hear you, and he will respond to you, and he will love you because he never stops loving you. So that's the first couplet. Then there's the next couplet. Jonah continues here. "You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the seas, and the current swirled around me, and all your waves and breakers swept over me. You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the seas, and the current swirled around me, and all your waves and breakers swept over me. You might be thinking, wait, didn't the sailors throw Jonah into the ocean? Like, God didn't do that. Well, Jonah's perspective was that God had an involvement and authority in these circumstances. So did God do this, or did Jonah do this? Is this a result of God's activity or Jonah's behavior? Well, the answer is yes. Yes, it's both. It's both. At first, it felt like punishment to Jonah for not aligning his life with God's direction. That's what he felt like at first. I said, he says, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again towards your holy temple. Jonah saying, I thought you abandoned me when you cast me out in the storm. I was thrown overboard and swallowed by a large fish, but then I had my head slap moment. I had my wake up moment. Here's the next thing that Jonah discovers. Consequences are about being corrected, not rejected. Consequences are about being corrected, not rejected. It's about you correcting and leading me in a different direction than I was going, because if I were to continue to go in that direction, I was no way I was getting out. It's about you correcting me and not rejecting me. Because every action every action has an opposite equal reaction. I think Isaac Newton said that. That's not part of the message, but anyways, just bring that in here. We have natural consequences to what we do, and we have unnatural consequences to what we do. I'll give you an example. A couple weeks ago, my son William, he's 7, he is fixated with fire right now. Like, he loves lighting fires or lighting candles. We're a big candle family. We've got candles everywhere, and so he had a lighter, okay? And he didn't ask me if he could light candles, but he went ahead and lit some candles. And the lighter, he's finished. He did great. He lit all the candles. The house is still standing, all good. But as soon as he finished lighting the candles, he let go of the flame, but obviously the spout is still super hot, and he leaned on it. He'll never do that again. That is a natural consequence to what he had done. But sometimes there are non-natural. I'm a great parent. Don't judge me here, okay? There are non-natural consequences as well to our actions, right? Just to use that same situation, if Will hadn't burnt himself, I probably would have told him not to touch that spout because it's hot, right? And I probably would have just said, "Oh, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that." And maybe given him a consequence if he continued to use the lighter without asking. That's like a non-natural consequence, right? It's not something that hurt him right away, but it's something that is meant to prevent him hurting him in the future. And so there's a natural consequence and there's unnatural consequence. And Jonah is realizing that the consequence of where he is right now isn't about being rejected. It wasn't God rejecting him. It was a correction in behavior. It was a correction in behavior. So at this point, Jonah realizes, I thought I knew what I wanted and the direction I should go, but clearly I had no idea, and God knew what was best for my life. I thought I knew, but apparently God knew more. So we continue. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath me barred me in forever. I love this seaweed turban version, right? The seaweed is wrapped around its head. It's so interesting because in ancient world, water represented consciousness. And going deep meant to explore the subconscious. And so going deeper represented going darker. So in the depths of the water, the depths of the water, and you're going deeper, and it represented going darker. And have you ever said this before to your kids, like they're afraid of the monsters in the closet or under the bed? There are no monsters in the dark, right? We said there's no monsters. Well, maybe not in that moment, but I don't know how true that is. Because why do we say don't come home before the lights turn on, right? The street lights, or come home before it gets dark? Because we're afraid of what might happen in the dark. People's worst actions are often in the dark. Crimes are often committed in the dark. Muggings are often committed in the dark. So people's monstrous behavior often happens in the dark. The worst crimes happen at night in the dark and are not typically in broad daylight. And so we are biologically predisposed to fear the dark. Like it's something that's been in us for forever. We're hardwired to fear the dark. Neurologically, over thousands of years, we've been taught to fear the dark. And this is symbolic. This is symbolic for Jonah. It's exploring the parts of you that you've been avoiding. It's exploring the parts of you that you've been suppressing, that you've been trying to forget. For those of you that have been here for a while, you know this story, and for those of you that are new, you can have the same level of judgment as everybody else. It's like when you sweep the dirt, and I don't do this anymore, but I have, in the kitchen, under the fridge, because you don't want to put it in the trash. You don't want to address it all. When you move that fridge, it's still there. Right? Just like that sort of metaphor of we don't want to deal with it right away, so we put it in the future problem and we suppress it. This is exploring the depths of like your subconscious, the things that you've been avoiding, the things that you've been afraid because it's dark and you know that it's there, but you don't want to address it because you don't know what the outcome of addressing it is. It feels like you're barred in it. It feels like you're stuck in it. It feels like you're trapped in it. And you just go, I don't want to go to that level yet. I'm not ready to go to that level yet. It's not simply what you're doing. It's not simply exploring your actions, but it's getting deeper than just the what. It's going to the why. Why am I continuing to behave like this? Why am I continuing to have this behavior? What is causing me? It's peeling back the layers of that onion. It's getting deeper and deeper and deeper. Why are you not doing what you ought to do? Why are you not doing what you ought? What is causing you to go and rebel and go in the complete opposite direction of what you ought to do? Why are you doing what you know you shouldn't be doing? Addressing those questions, not just the behavior, but the why behind the behavior, that's just a whole nother animal. That's just a whole nother animal. And you can't conquer the demons from your past if you don't face them. If you're too afraid to face them, they will continue to hold you back. They will continue to have you like in a prison, in a jail, with your wrists tied up to chains and you just can't move. They will put you in a metaphorical prison and you'll be held back from walking into the fullness of your life that God has for you. And Jonah was saying, I don't know if I can get out of this. I don't know if I can get out of this situation that I've put myself in. But you, Lord, brought my life from the pit. You, Lord, brought my life from the pit. And the pit was the word they used to refer to a trap for catching lions. And this is Jonah saying, you rescued me out of the trap that I fell into. That I felt, not that you put me into. Lord, you rescued me from the trap that I fell into. Isn't it interesting how we often fall into those traps time and time again? Like we get pulled out of those traps, but then we just fall for the same trick and go back into the trap. It's like when you're fishing. I'm not a huge fisherman, but I imagine there's like some fish-infested waters where the fish will just like jump into your boat. Right? It's like the Finding Nemo, don't go to the butt of, do they call it the butt? You touch the butt, right? Or you can put a hook in the water without any bait and the fish will keep biting and biting and you go, hello, it's a hook. But don't we just get hooked on things? Where we fall into the trap time and time again and we get out of the trap and spoiler alert, Jonah will do the same thing. Where we fall for a trap and then we get pulled out of the trap, but then we fall for the trap again. We fall into the same trap over and over and over again. That's just how it works. And so what Jonah is discovering, he's discovered that you're never too far from God to hear your cry. That when there's consequences, that you are being corrected, that's not rejection. And that the deeper you can go, the deeper that you can address those questions as to why I am doing what I'm doing, the freer you will become. The deeper you go, the freer you will become. God lifts you out of the pit, lifts you out of the trap. So those are the three, and we've got one more, but you are never too far from God. That he comes and he corrects, not rejects. And that the deeper that you can go and the deeper you can sort of self-reflect on why you are doing what you are doing, whether you need to do this on your own or whether you need to go to counseling or therapy to actually address those things, the freer you will actually become. And here's the final couplet. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. When I thought I'd never escape and my life was slipping away, I remembered. And to remember is to shift your focus from one thing to another. It's to shift your focus from what is overwhelming to who is an overcomer. It's shifting your focus from the circumstances where you think I can never get out of this circumstances. It's shifting your focus off of that and to the overcomer, the one who has overcome the world. And so Jonah, in the belly of the beast, remembers that the Lord is God and he is faithful and he will never leave him nor forsake him. The shift in focus is to place where he could overcome. He shifted his focus to a place where he could overcome instead of being overwhelmed. Have you ever been overwhelmed by your situation? Does it help focusing on the situation? Just going, how did I go? Woe is me. This is horrible. I can't believe I did this. I'm trapped. Isn't it a better idea to shift from overwhelming to the overcoming? So Jonah discovered that God is the overcomer. And when you put your focus on him, then that is far better than feeling overwhelmed in the situation. The shift in focus was one of trust for Jonah. He says this about it. He says, those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them. He'd say, I was clinging to something that I was using to try and control my life. When things felt uncontrollable, I went to what I thought would help bring control to my life. And that was the nature of idols, right? They were constructed items made by people. And sacrifices were made to these images of God to manipulate them and get what they thought they needed and what they wanted out of life. And people used stuff to pursue and get out of life what they thought they wanted. And we still do that today, but he continues. He says, thinking what I was holding on to took hold of me and led me away from God's love and best for my life. What I was holding on to took hold of me and led me away from God's love. What I was holding on to with all my might that I didn't want to let go led me away from God's love and away from the best for my life. What a turnaround. And all while he's still inside the belly of the beast. His circumstances hadn't changed, yet he is declaring gratitude for salvation. He was declaring gratitude for salvation while he was in the belly of the beast. But the beast wasn't what Jonah needed rescuing from. Remember the end of scene 1. Is there another slide? Sorry. Yeah. Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. The Lord provided a huge fish. He provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Oftentimes, we wonder why God prevents certain things and permits other things. Jonah is saying, I don't know why God didn't prevent me from going or why he permitted these things to happen, but I know the Lord provided an experience that would help me grow and become who I ought to become. And become who I ought to become. I remember, it's not too long ago, that I was in a really struggling place. I wasn't doing well, if I were to be frank. I was really struggling. My wife, Fiona, would sort of do some traveling, and there was this tension within my heart, within my soul, that I couldn't let go of. She would come home, and I would just I didn't know why I was struggling so much. It would always end in tears. I would just sit there crying like, I don't know why I feel this way. I want the best for you, Fiona. I want you to just keep living your dream. But I'm struggling. And time again, we would have these conversations where, again, I would just end in me crying. End in me just, because I didn't know what was going on. I knew that I had this tension, but it took so long to figure out the why. To peel back the layers and go, why am I feeling this way? What is it that's causing me to feel this way and to behave this way, where I'm almost feeling like I'm almost like a grouch at times? Where I'm not celebrating your success. Where all I can think about is me and my circumstance and how I'm doing. And so time and time again, we would have this conversation where I would just be asking, why? And it wasn't until I had to just take time. Now, we talk about like exercising physically and going for runs and working out and that type of stuff, and that's all great. But isn't it true that sometimes we neglect our spiritual health? And we neglect our emotional health? We know for us to be healthy that we have to eat well and go for an exercise and go for a run. But we just expect our emotions and our mental health to be strong. We just expect our spiritual health to be strong. And I was just getting by, to be honest. I was just going, well, I'm going my own direction right now. I'm just hoping for the best. I'm wishing my way to a strong mental health and a strong emotional health and a strong spiritual health. I'm just wishing my way there. But it wasn't until I was able to just get vulnerable and humble and just admit that I needed help, that I wasn't doing well, that I started to take my mental health and emotional health seriously. And just to, again, I trust you guys, and I'm sorry if this offends someone, but there was a time where my faith turned into my job. And that's a really humiliating thing for me to say, but it's just where I had got to. Where when I would read a Bible is when I was preparing for a sermon. When I was spending time with God was about preparing for a message. And I had to get out of that. And I had to realize that if there's a way for me to get out of the pit that I am in, it is going to be turning my eyes away from my circumstances and onto the overcomer of this world. And if you feel like you're in that place where you are spiritually dry, where you are emotionally and mentally struggling, to navigate a turnaround, first, we got to wake up to what's really going on. And secondly, we have to dive deeper. You have to dive deep. We need to dive deep and just enter into the places that we've been afraid of entering. Enter into the places that we've been afraid of and confront them. And like I said at the beginning, maybe this means going to therapy or going to a counselor. If you don't go to a counselor, you don't go to a therapy, and I'm all for it. If that's something that you feel like you need to do, you can do that. If you're not at that point yet, last week I gave you an option of telling a friend, can we go to that QR code, please? Of telling a friend what you need to wake up to, about what you're going through. And if you don't, and I want to encourage you to do that again, to find somebody that you trust to actually open up to about what you're going through. And if you don't have that person in your life right now, if you just want to, we'll have this up after the service, but if you scan this QR code, this will just take you to a form where you can just pray you can just write in what you're going through. And we would love to partner with you in prayer. We'd love to journey this with you. We'd love to help you navigate a turnaround. When you feel like you're in the pit, when you just keep falling for the same trap, and you don't know how to get out, that's where we have to shift our perspective and look to the overcomer, but I recognize you can't do that alone. We need one another. And so if you do want to take that initiative where you recognize, I need a turnaround, you just scan the QR code and we'd love to pray with you. You can do it anonymously, or you can put your name in and someone will actually reach out to you and meet with you. But let's not miss the opportunity to turn around a season of your life where you know you're on a downward spiral. So Heavenly Father, first we just want to say we love you. And I just want to say that I just want to say I'm sorry for my shortcomings. Sorry for putting other things above you and trying to go on what I think was best. Going in my own direction and just pulling a Jonah. God, we just pray for your forgiveness. For when we have turned our back upon you, God. We thank you for Jesus and the overwhelming, unconditional grace that came when he hung there on the cross and he defeated sin and he defeated death. I pray you would give us the boldness and the courage, God, to dive deep into what we're actually going through for the why that will allow us to navigate this turnaround. We thank you for this time in Jesus' name. Amen.